We're just going to go back now to our breaking news and the fact that a preliminary report has now been released from India's Air Accident Investigation Bureau into the loss of the Air India flight a month ago. It was a Boeing Dreamliner. It crashed soon after taking off from Ahmedabad, heading for London. I'm joined by our correspondent Archana Shukla in Mumbai. Archana, tell us what we know is in this preliminary report.
Well, so far, the preliminary report is a compilation of all the facts that has been discovered so far in the investigation of the air crash that killed 260 people on June 12th. As far as the data is concerned, there doesn't seem to be any mechanical issue with the 787 Dreamliner so far from the data that has been released and the investigations that have gone ahead. The report says that, according to the flight data recorder, both the fuel control switches, now these are the switches that are, while the plane is on ground, they are switched on before it starts, and they're only switched off when the plane lands and is in the bay. But the report says that both the fuel control switches, were moved from the run position to the cutoff position shortly after takeoff, and that could have possibly caused the loss of thrust. We know that the aircraft took off and just a few seconds later lost thrust and started sinking and then crashed. And this is a possible explanation to why that could have happened. Although the report also says that just a few seconds later, both the engines, one after the other, came back to the run-off position, which means they were restarted, but one of the engines could not reignite completely, and that could have led to the crash. These are, we must clarify that these are still preliminary findings. These are just some of the indications that the investigators have found from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, which has also recorded voices of the pilots discussing about this, when one pilot says, "Why did you switch it off?" and the other one says that I have not switched it off. So there was a communication on that part, but these are still very, very preliminary findings on what could have caused the crash.
And Archana, it's hard to underestimate really the shock that this caused, this crash across India and indeed in the UK, because this flight was heading here to London. It killed 241 of the 242 people on board. One British national managed to survive it. If pilot error is to blame, that is going to raise further questions. Obviously nothing definitive as yet, but that's what this preliminary finding, this preliminary report indicates. Obviously, it's only just emerged. I don't know if there's been any response at all yet.
We cannot call it pilot error yet because that is not how it is listed. The preliminary report has only given a listing of how they have recorded the data that has been downloaded. So I think it will be too, quick for us to say that it was a pilot error immediately as of now. But yes, it indicates that it was the fuel switches that could have caused the loss of trust. And, this investigation is also very complicated because this is one of the first crashes of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which is considered one of the most advanced planes and the safest of planes. And it did cause a lot of shock across the globe, in India and the UK and around the world. The plane was with a full fuel tank. So when the crash happened, when the aircraft blew apart, it really did char every single piece of that plane and the wreckage. And to get things out of the wreckage and to go through that data has also been a bit of a complicated struggle for the investigators here.
Yes, Archana Shukla, thank you very much indeed for that update on the report that's just been released, the preliminary report into that crash.
Let's try and understand a little bit more about those preliminary findings. We can speak now to David Gleave. He's aviation safety investigator. David, thanks for joining us. Now, these are just preliminary findings. They're just coming into us. The report has just been made public. But this issue that both the fuel cut-off switches transitioned from run to cut-off one after the other, with a time gap of just about 1 second. Is that something that can happen automatically, or does that take a human to physically do it?
I'm not ruling out the possibility of some software issue or an electrical arcing problem or something like that causing the signals to the relevant computers from sending that type of signal. The 1 second time gap is typically associated with how frequently the switch positions are sampled. So it could have been almost instantaneous. It could have been within almost next to each other or within 2 seconds, depending on where within the 1 second sampling time they were switched. Or it could be some form of human deliberate act. So at the moment, a lot of analysis will go in to say, how could this have happened electrically or electronically, as well as human intervention.
We do have the finding, though, relating to the voice box recording, where one pilot asks the other, why did you switch that off? And the other says, I didn't switch it off, which would suggest that it wasn't a human intervention there. How critical is that to the takeoff of a plane, that those buttons are flicked on and off, whether it's by a human or an electronic failure or a software issue?
Well, essentially it's the same as the key switch in your car. Switching the engines off is done directly through those particular buttons. So it's essential that when the signal that the engines receive is that they are to be kept on. Certainly the recycling of the buttons from off to on again happens if you have a double engine failure with the procedures on board that aeroplane. So it's absolutely critical that the switch remains and the sensors detect that the switch remains in that on position.
Now, the report seems to say that one of those engines managed to get itself going again and recycle again, but that the acceleration was not sufficient to keep the aircraft in the air. Was there any way that this aircraft could have recovered from what happened?
I don't think there was any way that it could have recovered, because essentially once the engine starts to wind down, it's a little like driving a car with a turbocharger. There's very little power at the bottom end when it starts to wind itself back up again, and then as it builds power, suddenly more power becomes available. So the findings are consistent with what I would expect in terms of it taking a significant amount of time for the engine to relight and build up power. The aeroplane should have been capable of flying with one engine on full power. So the good thing is that they've been able to eliminate certain other causes, or at least strong indications that it wasn't multiple bird strike or water in the fuel. But it is very unusual for the engines to fail directly after the aeroplane has lifted off.
Now, the Air Investigation Board says its investigation is continuing. These are just preliminary findings. Where would you expect that investigation to focus now? We're very much at the factual stage. This is what has been gathered, and on we go from there. There will be different groups looking at the survivability of the aeroplane. How did somebody get out and nobody else got out? There will be a big push on the psychological side to see why somebody could have made an error like this, or whether one of the pilots was prone to a deliberate malicious act like this. There will be engineering looking at how the switches could possibly move themselves, and they're designed not to move. You have to lift them as well as move them, so you can't just knock them. And the electronics people will be looking at the software and possibly what could have corrupted any of the computers to send a false signal back saying, please switch off the engines at this point in flight. Will there be anything for Boeing to look at from these preliminary findings that we have so far? The aviation authorities have not released anything in terms of mandatory inspections or anything like that. So at the moment, Boeing will be fed information through the National Transportation Safety Board's accredited representative to the accident. And with no action coming out from them or from the Federal Aviation Administration, there's nothing to indicate something serious has happened that needs a worldwide grounding of the fleet or a direct inspection in the next 24 hours before the next flight or anything like that. For people, civilians looking in at this and seeing these findings, is there anything that should give anyone cause for concern getting on a Boeing flight today, tomorrow, or any other time?
I'd be quite happy getting on a 787 tomorrow. This doesn't worry me at all. It's a very well-designed aeroplane with a lot of safety systems, and there's a lot of very good engineers and psychologists working on this case, trying to work out as hard as they can to work out what the problem was in the first place and any potential cures. So the industry will learn very quickly from this as and when there are any findings.
And when you're going through, David, there, everything that still has to be looked at with the investigation team, what sort of timeline would you put on that happening? I mean, it sounds like it's still a massive task ahead.
Yes, traditionally the reports would be ready within a year. These days, with some of the complexities, it can take 2.5 years. But the real thing is to separate out the recommendations to industry, and these are released as soon as possible for immediate action, rather than waiting for the full report that the relatives want to read to understand. So we need to separate out those two pieces from each other. But the main report could take a couple of years by the time that everybody's had their comments and had the time that's necessary to do the analysis.
But if any changes are needed to procedures or software or anything like that, would those happen before the final report is there?
Yes, certainly. As soon as the accident investigators are ready to release any recommendation, we'll go straight out to industry. The regulators will take action, the airlines and the manufacturers will take action at that point. And you will see that in some of the reports that are out there where they said we don't need to release a recommendation at the end of the report. We've already done this partway through the report, and the industry has responded. So an immediate response will come from industry.
Okay. All right, David Gleave, aviation safety investigator, thank you very much for helping us parse through those preliminary findings of this report into the Air India accident.